Whether we see ourselves as Zen or ordinary mind Zen or just Buddhist, how we think of ourselves as a self, how we think of what a self is, inevitably shapes our practice. And then there's always the question of where do these ideas of how I see this self or how I see other selves, where do these ideas come from? And is it just something I dreamt up? Is it something I get from society around me? Is it something I get from the teachings of the Zen tradition? Or is it about the interaction of all of these? I think everybody would probably agree that deluded ideas of the self are going to cause us problems. And so how do we know? How do we tell? Often, generally, we seem to be offered some version of either practicing in pursuit of our true self, the real me, the me deep inside, or perhaps, on the other hand, an idea of no self, that I will put down this self that so much of tradition tells me is the cause of all my problems, which Christian morality itself tells me selfishness, bad. So what's my practice aiming at? Where does it work in relation to either of these ideas? But then when my own teacher, Barry Magid, says, my true self is who I am on the street, how does that fit with any of this, or doesn't it? And I wanted to talk about this evening, partly because these are ideas which we kind of skirt around a lot, but also partly because next year or whenever there will be a new book of Barry's Dharma talks coming out, for which I'm writing an introduction for the section on the self. And that's been great because it's been an opportunity to look over some old talks and think about the significance of Barry's contribution to Zen thinking. Most of you will know that he brings now decades of practice as a psychoanalyst and teacher of analysts and analytic theorist to Zen practice. And it's the coming together of these which I think has allowed him to make a really unique contribution, pushing our understanding of what Zen practice might be forward. And of course that's most interesting not at some kind of theoretical level, but a sense of, how do I live my life in this moment, this moment, this moment? So how does the idea of my true self is who I am on the streets fit with maybe our more traditional ideas of true self or no self? I want to take a little detour through a little bit of history. Joko Beck, founder of Ordinary Mind, Barry's teacher, began the San Diego Zen Center in 1983. Most of you will know something of this story, and I'm not going to go into great detail this evening. As a result of actively rejecting her teacher, Taizan Maesumi, over his serial sexual predation, alcoholism. He'd given her Dharma transmission 7 years earlier, I think. So she's a well-established teacher within Los Angeles Zen Center by this point. Got too much We need to address these issues. And of course, this is the mid-1980s, so this is the great era when so many of the great Zen and wider Tibetan teachers who were being taken as effectively gurus, effectively beings who could do no wrong because of their unbelievable levels of spiritual insight, turned out to be very human, very predictably human. And what should we, the Sanghas, do about that? How do we respond? As I said, Joko's solution was to found her own Sangha, but also to be one of those teachers asking the question, well, why? Come on, these are supposed to be, in one sense or another, enlightened, realised beings. How can this happen? And one very, I think, important and influential idea that came up this time was from the psychologist, psychotherapist John Welwood, who came up with the idea of spiritual bypassing. That actually what you needed was a good foundation of personal psychological integration before you really began a separately, elevated, transcendental spiritual journey. And in terms of this, in relation to the Zen idea of no self, putting down the personal, putting down one's selfishness, one's engagement with the trivia of life as just another desiring being. Little phrase. You've got to be somebody before you can be nobody. Attained a wide currency at the time, and it's quite interesting because it's suggesting, after you've done the psychological work, then you can go on to the properly spiritual work after that. And of course that goes along with this very traditional notion of self-bad, no self-good. Self-bad because self-inevitably selfishness. And so we put down self and we move beyond it. And in that sense, we're seeing self as what makes me, me. My personal history that gives me the emotional reactions that I do, that leads me to think in certain ways, gives me responses. The colour, the flavour, the texture. So do I really want to put that down? What's this about? So no self is clearly a purification practice, and purification, again, very present notion in Buddhism, that what we're trying to do is get rid of, erase the bad, foster the good. To a certain extent, nothing wrong with that, comes out of what is essentially a monastic tradition. So again, for me, out in the world, living my life in the world, is it about purifying me? So we can say that, in a sense, a lot of our ideas of looking for a true self and looking for a no self, or to become a no self, have a lot in common. They're both about losing. They're both about giving up. They're both about, they're both about this moment, this experiencing, not being it. My true self is where? Where should I look for it? Great Zen koan. What is your true face before your parents were born? Where do I look for it? In here, up in the air? Or equally, will I ever become this being that's abandoned, being able to just put down everything that significantly makes me me? And how's that going to play with a family? I mean, it's fine if I'm a monastic, I'm a proper home leaver. If I had a wife and children, husband and children, bye. That's not my journey. My parents, bye. See you maybe in a decade. Does that work? Is that what I'm aiming at as, in traditional Buddhist terms, a householder, a layperson, a person with messy connections, a person with ailing relatives, children having problems at school, the rest of life, relationship? Comes back to the fundamental questions. What's my practice for? And weirdly, our answers, or the answers to which both Joko and Barry in their own way were working towards, have a lot in common with, in a way, the monastic in our tradition. Dogen, the wonderful founder of Soto Zen, and his idea of practice realization that, well, we won't go into that this evening, but just that actually, yes, we are deluded beings. We practice within delusion. We're not defiled by our delusions. We practice as deluded beings. And this is what our practice is. This is what our life is. It's not a purification process. It's not an elimination process. We're already here because this is it. If not here, if not now, in this moment. Let's come at this from a different direction. Emptiness. Non-separation. As I was trying to nudge us in that direction of this way of thinking. If my true self, if non-self is always over there or in front of me or above me or somewhere, it's not here. And it is always here. This is always it. But then we say, yes, but the self is an illusion. Surely we don't be corrupted by this illusion, misled by this illusion. Yes, but. And in terms of just, sometimes you hear a talk, I mean, actually you're lucky. You listen to 100 talks and maybe there's one phrase in one of those talks and it goes, oh yes, that connects. So actually, I can't remember when this talk is from. I think it's 2000. Actually, it's a long time ago. Maybe 2014. So this is just little Barry's phrase. The Heart Sutra insists that if the self doesn't exist, neither does the floor you're sitting on, or the air you're breathing, or the sun that's shining. What? The Heart Sutra insists that if the self doesn't exist, neither does the floor you're sitting on, or the air you're breathing, or the sun that's shining. And of course, we know the Wisdom Sutras teach us, Nagarjuna teaches us, nothing exists absolutely, everything exists relatively. So, at one level, to say, the self doesn't exist, yeah, but it's, look around you, for heaven's sake, it's no less real than everything else. It doesn't have a special degree of non-reality. So we are this self, we practice with this self because, well, what happens when we imagine or aspire to not being self. In a certain sense, quoting Barry again, in a certain sense, that idea of no self is meant to be a kind of relief from the tyranny of self. But when you talk to people about what that would mean to them, almost inevitably it's some version of wanting one part of the self to be free of another. And with so many practices, they're practices of not here, not now. This isn't it because it is over there, or over there, or over there. Which comes back to the point of, okay, you're a Buddha, you're a fully enlightened being. Why don't you get it? Why don't you realise that? Why doesn't it feel like you imagine it would? It is always this moment, this experiencing. And of course it's the foundation of Joko's teaching, this gap between what I want this moment to be, or how I imagine this moment should be, and what I'm actually experiencing in this moment. This gap, this resistance, this turning away from the experience of just this moment. Hence the title of Barry's second book, Ending the Pursuit of Happiness, this pursuit of fixing me, fixing my relationship with the world. So this is the basis of ordinary mind and what Barry and Joko share. Except, of course, Joko, for reasons we've talked about, and I'm sure we'll talk about again, seems to sit happily enough within the idea of no self, and that, the kind of point of infinity, you could imagine a hypothetical being that was this, and we'd all be somewhere along that journey. But that's actually in distinction to her real, the actual heart of her teaching, which is, no, it's this moment, it's here, now, this experience, this is all there is. Which is why Barry will say, you want to see your true face before your parents were born? Look in the mirror. It's there when you're doing your teeth. It's there all the time. It's there when you're filling in your tax return, to take another example people like to use. It's there in the most mundane activity. It's there in the most exalted moment. It's not hidden. Nothing is hidden. Take the title of Barry's third book, if we're being quite Barry-ish this evening. So the truth of this self, obviously if it's not separate, is that it's always relational. It's always about connection. Again, Thich Nhat Hanh calls it interbeing, but interconnectedness, codependent causation, or whatever name we want to give it, the absolute interpenetration and interconnection of everything. The delusion isn't self, the delusion is separation. But why is thinking of myself as separate potentially so damaging? And one of the points of Barry's teaching developing in the direction that it did and has isn't really some great realization of the nature of emptiness, but actually working for decades with student after student after student who'd come to him from some sangha or another, who'd been told they had problems with anger, or they couldn't actually finally get this moment of realization or kensho. And what were they doing? They were turning away from this moment. They were turning away from connection. What's the real problem with thinking of yourself as a no self or a true self as other than this self of this moment? Third quote. A lot of different kinds of practices almost explicitly try to turn a relational problem into a one-person problem, a not separate problem into a separate problem in my terms. A lot of different kinds of practices almost explicitly try to turn a relational problem into a one-person problem, where the problems that you have in your life with people in the real world don't have to be solved between you and other people or in the world, but they're going to be solved internally. It's all to do with me. It's to avoid the relational, the literally vulnerable dependence on other people and attachments, and our embeddedness in our social, relational, and physical world. Actually, I'll read that again because it's nice. It knows how to turn a phrase out, Barry. A lot of different kinds of practices almost explicitly try to turn a relational problem into a one-person problem, where the problems that you have in your life with people in the real world don't have to be solved between you and other people or in the world, but they're going to be solved internally. It's to avoid the relational, the literally vulnerable dependence on other people and attachments, and our embeddedness in our social, relational, and physical world. It's turning not separate into the fantasy of separate. And what's the fundamental facts about our embeddedness? Well, it's vulnerable dependence. It's our interconnectedness with others. It's our vulnerability and ultimately our mortality. Will my true self protect me from death? Protect me from other people? Protect me from aging? Protect me from sickness? Any of the classic Buddhist problems. The great matter of life and death. Or am I happy enough to just plunge into life? Let my practice help me evolve as and through life. So I think what the direction that Barry is trying to take us here is a practice which allows us to bring the full range of tools which psychology, psychoanalysis, just reflection can allow us to bring to my actions as a deluded, related being enmeshed in life, in this moment and every other moment. And that we do that much better if we give up the pursuit of an elsewhere, the fantasy of a true self which is separate, the fantasy of a self which is objective and literally above it all. If not here, if not now, the self who I am, the self who I'm in this moment, is a self which is inevitably and always shaped by my world. That's surely good Zen, surely good Buddhism. And it's a world which in turn I help shape That's the point of my practice, the point of my action. I am shaped and I shape. I am a part of this world in this moment and every moment, not separate. So thank you, Joko. And thank you, Barry. And thank you for the opportunity of looking over your talks again. We'll come back to this again and again, I'm sure. Began by saying whether you think you're ordinary mind Zen or just Buddhist or whatever. How we think about what a self is, what this self is important. It impacts our practice. Maybe there's a moment of insight in this talk for you. Maybe it's just, nah. But I think it's important to think about these things. I think it's fine to disagree too. Let's talk. Let's think it through further. Meantime, let's sit.